water, cleaning water, keeping it clean, and sharing it with others. So it's about caring and sharing. Like many of us, when I was in high school, I read Samuel Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. How many of you had to do that too? Many of us. And its most quoted line is probably this one. I'm sure you remember that too. Water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink. The sailors of the poem are surrounded by a mass of undrinkable water, and they cannot quench their thirst, even though it's water. If we drink seawater, as you probably know, or you should, we get dehydrated because our kidneys need fresh water, a lot of it, to process and get rid of the amount of sodium. So we will literally die of thirst. You wonder if that's why in pubs they give you salty snacks, because it makes us buy more beer. I always thought so. But more seriously, we see the effect in industrialized agriculture, where the application of artificial fertilizer causes salinization of the soil, and more water is needed over time in order to make things grow. And that depletes the water table. Instead of going down 250 feet or so to get a well going for drinking water, in some places in Michigan it's now more like 800 feet. And it gets worse. Now that phrase from the Ancient Mariner is also used metaphorically to describe a situation where there is great abundance, and yet we cannot benefit from it. I just read that the new compensation package at the Tesla company will bring the net worth of Elon Musk to, did you read it? How much is it? $1 trillion. And yet, not many of the needy in the world will benefit from that abundance. So that's kind of the message of the Ancient Mariner. Water, in its apparent abundance, is often used as a way to control and subdue people. I say apparent abundance nowadays because access to unpolluted water is becoming increasingly difficult. And perhaps the most cruel way of restricting access to water is during violent occupation of one group of people by another. And to me, that immediately brings to mind the population of Gaza. Israel has deprived the people in Gaza of water by various means. It's really a complete program. There is destruction of the critical water supplies and of the sanitation infrastructure. There's a cutting off directly of food supplies and restricting humanitarian aid overall. By this time last year, 85% of the water and sanitation infrastructure in Gaza has been either damaged or destroyed altogether. And another thing you may have heard in the news, which is not surprising because we kind of know this, but northern Gaza now meets the 3 parts of the definition that the United Nations uses of genocide. Organizations like Doctors Without Borders now see widespread illnesses and a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. Even where water could be reached, we see that water literally kills directly because people who try to get to it are being killed. A story on PBS that was published just almost a month ago, 3 weeks ago, concludes that water represents danger. People are getting killed to try to get to it. Especially in August, when the story was written, there was also a heat wave in the area, so many catastrophes were happening together. Even where water access is not used as a method to kill people directly, there is increasing risk of scarcity. Now, there are lots of oceans, and desalinization is a solution, but traditional methods to do that are very inefficient and expensive. But in the last couple of years in the Netherlands, they have begun to use solar power as a long-run sustainable method to desalinize water. And there's a lot of water around the Netherlands if you think about its geography. So that is a long-term solution. And in the same place, and we do that in other places too, they're using robots to remove pollution from the rivers that spill their water into the oceans and thereby partly polluted. We see these robots at work or these kinds of robots at the lower level of technological savvy. We see them at work to clean swimming pools. But in order to clean rivers, there is more that is needed. There are chemicals, there are very small particles. So those simple robots are okay for pollution in the form of particles. You know, you just let the robot go around and there's a filter and it catches particles. But what about the dangerous chemicals? Some of them can be removed and others remain problematic. But there too there are methods. And again in the Netherlands, where there is so much need for water and so much access to some sources of water, they have used a combination of some natural filtration systems. For example, mosses are great natural filtration methods. But there are also methods that are similar to what people use who have fish tanks, but they're applied on a larger scale. One thing that some people who have fish tanks would love to have is a method called advanced oxidization, but that's not really available in a general way. But that is used to clean water. And there's also granular activated carbon. Well, that is something you know about if you have an aquarium. And there are various membrane technologies, filtering technologies. Now, these kinds of approaches don't just prevent contamination and maintain good water quality. They are doing so sustainably and without using chlorine for primary disinfection. Chlorine does not taste well, and it's not really good for you either. And for drinking water, I don't know if you've seen this story on the news, but they now make drinking water pods that have a membrane around them that is made from seaweed. So they're like little balls of water, and you can bite into them and suck the water out. And they provide this to people who are doing sports where you need a lot of hydration, like running. You know, they just, instead of handing out water bottles, which then lead to all this plastic pollution, they just hand out these little pods, and the runners eat and drink from the pods, and then there is no pollution. So you literally can bite into the water. So this saves millions and millions of bottles, plastic bottles. And as far as cleaning goes, nature itself provides solutions. One exciting way that some of the pollution in the oceans is reduced is by the so-called Neptune balls. Some of them wash up on beaches, you may have seen them. They're just round balls. Some are like this, some are like that. Some stay in the water and they sink to the bottom. But what they are is they're balls that are formed by seaweed. And the seaweed is of the variety Posidonia oceana. The reason why I'm saying the name is because not all seaweed lends itself to being shredded and then forming itself, reforming itself and making balls and then picking up other stuff in the process. So this kind of seaweed, when it gets loosened like that, swirls around in the current and it forms these balls that have they have been known about. Traditionally, they have been used for insulation, for packaging, for bedding, because they tend to be soft. But nowadays, they often collect those microplastics that are all over the oceans, and sometimes even bigger plastics. A typical Neptune ball can contain 1,500 pieces of plastic from the ocean. And much of that plastic comes from human activity on land, but some of it is also generated in the ocean directly, like fishing nets, plastic bags from boats, rope, plastic equipment. I recently went on a hike in a place where there are lots of coves and strong ocean currents and wind, and those coves were just covered with that kind of plastic pollution, ropes, fishing nets. There was even a beacon from a ship that had been thrown up by the storm that was now stuck in the rocky wall somewhere. It was just totally unreal. So a lot of it just kind of comes up on the beaches, and it would be nice if people went around and picked it up, but that's not happening everywhere. So the seaweed grows on in meadows, really, on the ocean floors where it's rather shallow. And it's like those cleansing robots in the rivers. The seaweed balls capture carbon and sediment, and they also trap plastics directly. And how much plastic are we talking? Well, just part of it is 250 million tons of plastic that gets dumped in rivers, not deliberately, but by various means. Ends up in rivers and thereby in the oceans. So 250 million tons each year, that is a lot. And it doesn't just disappear. So there's a lot of seaweed, hopefully, and a lot for seaweed to work with. But it's not ideal. Unfortunately, only fewer than 20% of those seaweed balls actually have plastic in them. But when they do, it's an awful lot. They even, the huge ones even trap things like diapers and stuff like that. And you can see that when you find them on the beach. So I'm thinking that, and I'm not the only one thinking that, but technology could augment the work that is done by seaweed like that and help recapture at least some of the plastic in our oceans and help clean it. Is all of this enough? Well, probably not. But it goes in a good direction. And if it's combined with human activities and decisions that, for a change, deprive no one deliberately of water, and decisions to share the clean water equitably across the human and animal populations, then we are getting somewhere. And may we make it so. Amen, and blessed be. And now I would like to ask our worship associate to bring the children back from the classroom for our final water communion ritual, which will be to share the water that we collect